5 years ago, a pharaoh made the most ruthless decision of his life. He cast aside the woman he loved, convinced she could never give him an heir. Marked by humiliation and heartbreak, Queen Nile vanished into the desert sands, taking with her a secret that would change everything. Now, as fate brings them together once more, Kemet is faced with the unthinkable: two little girls with golden hair and eyes far too much like his own. The shock is overwhelming, but the real challenge is only beginning. Caught between the conspiracies of the High Council, long-buried truths, and a love that never stopped burning, the pharaoh will stop at nothing to reclaim what he lost, even if it means facing the judgment of the gods and the weight of his own mistakes. The scorching Egyptian sun beat down mercilessly on the royal procession as it wound its way through the palace gates. Queen Nile stood with perfect posture in the center courtyard, her golden eyes, the same unusual hue that had first captivated the pharaoh, now rimmed with unshed tears she refused to let fall. Around her neck hung the royal scarab pendant, its weight suddenly unbearable against her collarbone. "You have failed in your most sacred duty to Egypt," Pharaoh Kemet's voice boomed across the courtyard, echoing off the limestone walls painted with scenes of gods and victories. His frame, once a source of comfort and protection, now towered over her like the massive statues that guarded the temples. 5 years, Nile. 5 years I have waited for an heir." The courtiers and servants kept their eyes downcast, though their ears strained to catch every word. The royal couple's childlessness had long been whispered about in dark corners of the palace, but now the pharaoh's patience had finally snapped like a reed in a sandstorm. "My lord," Nile began, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening within her chest. "Perhaps if we consult with the high priestess of Isis once more—" "Enough!" Kemet slammed his royal staff against the ground, the sound as final as a tomb door closing. "The gods have spoken. You are barren land and Egypt needs fertile fields." An elderly handmaiden named Maya stifled a sob behind her hand. She had raised Nile from childhood and had been the only one to notice the subtle changes in the queen's body over the past 2 moons, changes that suggested the impossible might have finally happened. "The decree is final," continued the pharaoh, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. For just a moment, Nile caught a glimpse of the man she had fallen in love with before the crown and its pressures had hardened him. "You are to be exiled to the western deserts. You will be given provisions and protection, but you may never again set foot in Waset." Whispers rippled through the assembled court like waves on the Nile. Exile rather than death was unexpected mercy, or perhaps a more prolonged cruelty. "Does my lord not remember his vows before Hathor?" Nile asked, her voice quiet but carrying in the sudden silence. "You promised eternal devotion, like the sun that never fails to rise." Something flickered in Kemet's eyes, regret perhaps or memory, but it was quickly extinguished. Behind him stood Rahotep, the sumo vizier, whose thin lips curved in the barest suggestion of satisfaction. He had whispered in the pharaoh's ear for years that the queen must be cursed, must be infertile, must be replaced. "The gods understand necessity," Kemet replied, "as should you." Later that night, as the palace slept, Maya hurried through the servants' corridors to Nile's chambers, her old joints protesting the speed. She found the queen not in tears, as expected, but sitting calmly at her writing table, composing what appeared to be final instructions. "My queen," whispered Maya urgently, "you must tell him the truth." Nile looked up, her face serene in the lamplight. "And what truth is that, dear Maya?" The old woman moved closer, her voice dropping even lower. "I've seen the signs, my lady. The morning sickness you hide, the subtle rounding of your belly when you bathe. The gods have blessed you at last." A small, sad smile played on Nile's lips. "And what would that change? Rahotep has poisoned his mind. If I told Kemet now, he would only accuse me of lying to save myself. Or worse, claim I had been unfaithful. But, my queen—" "No, Maya. Perhaps this is the god's plan." Nile's hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach. "In the western desert lies the forgotten temple of Bastet. I shall find sanctuary there, away from the eyes of the court. And when the time comes," Maya gasped, understanding dawning in her weathered face, "you would keep the pharaoh's heir from him? That is dangerous ground, my lady. What choice do I have? To fight the decree is to invite greater scrutiny. To submit quietly gives me freedom and time." Nile rose from her seat with the grace that had made her famous throughout the kingdom. "Will you come with me, my faithful friend? I will need your midwifery skills when the moons have passed." "Until death and beyond, my queen." Maya answered without hesitation, placing her wrinkled hand over Nayla's smooth one. The journey to the western desert was grueling. Though given an escort befitting her former status, Nayla felt every jolt of the wooden cart against her increasingly sensitive body. By the time they reached the edge of cultivated lands, she was certain of what her body had been telling her. Not only was she with child, but the movements she felt suggested more than one life growing within. The Temple of Bastet had once been grand, but years of desert winds had worn away its paint and grandeur. Still, its thick walls promised shelter, and the small community of priestesses who maintained it welcomed the dishonored queen with more warmth than she had felt in the palace's cool marble halls. "We will call you Seret here," said the elderly head priestess after hearing Nayla's story. "Guardian of secrets in the old tongue, and secrets we shall keep." As moons waxed and waned, Nayla's body changed dramatically. Maya fussed over her constantly, applying cool compresses and brewing herbal teas to ease the discomfort. The queen's once slender frame now housed what the old midwife confirmed were twin lives growing stronger each day. "Twins," Nayla whispered one evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the dunes in hues of gold and crimson. "Perhaps this is why the gods made us wait so long. They were creating something special." Maya nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But my lady, have you considered what this means? The pharaoh banished you believing you barren. When these children are born, they will be daughters of the temple," Nayla cut in firmly. "Bastet will be their mother, and I merely their guardian. No one need ever know they carry royal blood." But even as she spoke, Nayla gazed out toward the eastern horizon, where beyond countless dunes lay the palace and the man who had once been her world. Sometimes in the quiet moments before dawn, she wondered if he ever looked west and thought of her. "I will write it all down," Maya said suddenly, "on a clay tablet, sealed with your royal mark, the truth of their parentage, should anything happen to you. The children of a pharaoh should know their heritage even if from afar." Nayla hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Very well, but keep it hidden, old friend. Some truths are better revealed by time than by hasty hands." As her time grew near, Nayla dreamed increasingly of Kamet, not the stern ruler who had banished her, but the young prince who had once chased her through the palace gardens, both of them laughing under the watchful eyes of the gods, painted on every surface. In these dreams he held tiny bundles in his strong arms, his golden eyes shining with tears of joy. She would wake from these visions gasping, hands clutching her swollen belly, wondering what might have been, and what still might be in the mysterious weaving of the gods. What neither woman could know was that far away in the palace, Rahotep had intercepted the message Maya had secretly tried to send. The tablet now lay buried in the vizier's private chamber, its contents known only to him, a powerful secret to be wielded at the perfect moment. And while Nayla prepared to bring new life into the world, seeds of intrigue were already sprouting in the fertile soil of the royal court, their roots reaching outward like the fingers of fate. As the desert stars blazed overhead, Nayla whispered prayers to Bastet, protector of women and children. Whatever destiny awaited her daughters, she vowed they would grow up knowing love, strength, and the resilience that had carried their mother through the cruelest separation, a resilience they would need in the years to come, when the sands of time would inevitably shift to reveal long-buried truths. 5 years passed like the slow-moving waters of the Nile during drought season. Pharaoh Kamet had hardened further, his golden eyes growing cold as the metal of his crown. The palace halls, once filled with Nayla's musical laughter, now echoed with only the formal cadence of court proceedings and forced celebrations. "The inspection of Abun-Het cannot be delayed further, my pharaoh," declared Ptahhotep, the royal architect. His papyrus scroll unfurled before the throne. "The irrigation systems require your blessing before the season turns." Kamet nodded absently, his mind elsewhere as it often was these days. The emptiness that had followed Nayla's banishment had never been filled, not by concubines, not by duties, not even by the expansion of his kingdom's borders. "Prepare the royal barge," he commanded finally. "We depart at dawn." The journey down the Nile was uneventful, the royal entourage gliding past villages where peasants stopped their work to bow as the divine presence of their ruler passed by. Children ran alongside the riverbank, their small faces alight with awe at the gilded splendor. Kamet observed them with a heaviness in his chest he couldn't name. Children, always children, everywhere except where he most needed them, in his succession line. Abun-Het lay at the edge of fertile lands, where greenery still fought a valiant battle against the encroaching desert. Beyond it stretched the vast western deserts, and somewhere in those endless sands lived the woman he still saw in his dreams. "My lord," ventured Menkaf, his most trusted guard captain, "the temple of Bastet lies only half a day's journey from here. They say a holy woman there has been blessed with extraordinary healing powers. The locals call her Seret." "What of it?" Kamet asked sharply. Menkaf bowed his head. "Forgive me, Great One. I only thought your wrist has been troubling you since the Hittite campaign. Perhaps a visit might be worthwhile while we are so near." It was a reasonable suggestion, and yet Kamet felt an inexplicable unease. He had avoided the Western territories since Nayla's exile, as if the very sands might whisper accusations. "Very well," he said at last, "but a small party only. I have no patience for ceremony in this heat." The Temple of Bastet appeared on the horizon like a mirage, its weathered sandstone walls blending with the dunes. As they approached, Kamet was struck by how modest it was compared to the grand temples of Waset, and yet there was something peaceful about its simplicity, something that pulled at him. A small group of priestesses greeted them at the gates, heads bowed in deference. Among them stood a taller figure, her face obscured by the traditional head covering of a high priestess. "Great Pharaoh," she spoke, her voice carefully modulated, "you honor our humble temple. May Bastet's blessing be upon you." There was something in that voice, something that made Kamet's heart stutter in his chest. But before he could focus on it, a commotion broke out in the temple courtyard. Two small girls, no more than 5 years old, darted out from behind a column chasing a temple cat. Their laughter rang out like silver bells in the quiet sanctity of the space. The priestesses moved quickly to intercept them, but not before Kamet caught sight of their faces. Time seemed to stop, the desert air suddenly thick and impossible to breathe. The girls were identical, with skin the color of burnished copper and delicate features that might have been carved by the most skilled artisans, but it was their eyes that froze the blood in Kamet's veins. Unmistakable golden eyes, the exact shade that had marked his own royal lineage for generations. His gaze snapped back to the tall priestess, who had gone very still. "Remove your covering," he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of absolute authority. The courtyard fell silent. Even the children sensed the tension, their play forgotten as they huddled together, watching with wide eyes. Slowly, with hands that betrayed the slightest tremor, the priestess lowered her head covering. Nayla's face had changed subtly. There were new lines at the corners of her eyes, and the desert sun had darkened her skin. But those eyes, the curve of her lips, the proud tilt of her chin, she was still the most beautiful woman Kamet had ever seen. "Explain," he said, the single word containing a universe of questions. "Great Pharaoh," she began formally, though her eyes flashed with something that might have been defiance, "what would you have me explain?" Kamet's gaze moved deliberately to the two girls, who were now being quietly ushered away by an elderly woman he vaguely recognized as Nayla's former handmaiden. "Stop," he commanded. "Bring them back." The old woman froze, her protective stance over the children speaking volumes. "Maya," Nayla said softly, "it's all right." Reluctantly, Maya guided the girls back to stand before the pharaoh. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Not just the eyes, but the set of their small jaws, the arch of their eyebrows. Kamet saw himself reflected in miniature, mixed with Nayla's grace. "What are your names?" he asked, kneeling down to their level, his voice gentler than any in his entourage had heard in years. The girls looked to Nayla for permission. When she nodded, the slightly taller one stepped forward. "I am Zara," she said, her voice clear and unafraid, "and this is my sister Layla. We're priestesses in training." "Are you indeed?" Kamet asked, something like wonder cracking through his royal mask. "And how old are you, priestesses in training?" 5 cycles of the flooding," answered Layla, the quieter one. "We were born when the star of Isis was brightest. 5 years. Conceived just before the banishment." The realization washed over Kamet like a tidal wave, leaving him momentarily speechless. "My lord," interrupted Menkaf uncertainly, "shall I have the royal tent prepared? The hour grows late." Kamet rose slowly, his eyes never leaving Nayla's face. "Leave us," he ordered. When no one moved immediately, he turned, his expression thunderous. "All of you, now." The courtyard cleared with remarkable speed, though Maya lingered protectively near the children, until Nayla nodded that she too should go. When they were alone, except for the twins, who watched this strange interaction with curious eyes, Kamet spoke in a voice rough with emotion. You were with child when I sent you away. It wasn't a question, but Nayla answered anyway. I was. And you didn't tell me. Would it have mattered? The question hung between them, heavy as a stone sarcophagus. Kamet's silence was answer enough. Why have you come here? Nayla asked finally. I didn't know you were here, he replied honestly. The gods have played a crueler joke than even I could have imagined. Zara tugged at her mother's robes. Is he angry, mother? His face is like the storm gods. Mother? Kamet repeated, the word seeming to catch in his throat. Nayla placed a protective hand on each child's shoulder. Yes, I am their mother. And you, Pharaoh Kamet, are their father, though they have never known it until this moment. The girls' eyes widened, their gazes swinging between the adults with new understanding dawning. You're the Pharaoh from Mother's stories? Layla asked tentatively. The one who rules from the great house on the river. Kamet felt something crack within his chest, a wall of ice that had formed around his heart the day Nayla had left. Yes, he said simply, his voice thick. Do you have cats in your palace? Zara asked seriously. We have 17 here, but Priestess Neferu says that's too many. Despite everything, Kamet found himself laughing, a rusty sound, as if long unused. We have cats, though perhaps not 17. Nayla watched this exchange with guarded eyes. The children should rest now, it's past their time for sleep. No, both girls protested in unison. We want to hear about the palace, Zara insisted. And the river, added Layla. Kamet looked to Nayla, a silent question in his eyes. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded slightly. Very well, she conceded, but only a short time. Then bed. As the desert stars emerged overhead, Pharaoh and Priestess sat awkwardly side by side, while two young girls peppered their father with questions about a life they had never known. Kamet answered each one as if addressing his most important advisors, his voice gradually warming as the conversation continued. Watching him with their daughters, Nayla felt old wounds throb beneath the scar tissue she had so carefully cultivated. This was the future she had imagined in those early, happy years of their marriage, Kamet teaching their children about their heritage, their laughter echoing through spaces made warmer by family love. How did you meet our mother? Zara asked suddenly, bringing Nayla back to the present with a jolt. Kamet's eyes met hers over the children's heads. She was dancing, he said softly, in the Hall of Water Mirrors during the Festival of Renewal. I had never seen anyone move like that, as if she were water herself, flowing between forms. Mother still dances, Layla exclaimed. She teaches us too, but we're not as good yet. I'm sure you dance beautifully, Kamet said, his gaze still locked with Nayla's. When the children were finally led away to bed by a hovering Maya, the former royal couple faced each other alone for the first time in 5 years. They are extraordinary, Kamet said. They are, Nayla agreed, and they have been safe and happy here, away from court intrigues and power struggles. The implied accusation hung in the air between them. You should have told me, he said finally. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought it a desperate ploy to avoid banishment? Nayla's voice held years of buried pain. Rahotep had your ear completely. He would have called me a liar, or worse, suggested the children were not yours. Kamet's expression darkened at the mention of his vizier. Rahotep's influence has waned in recent years. I have come to see certain matters more clearly. How convenient for you, Nayla replied, an edge to her voice. While I raised your daughters in exile. I didn't know. The words burst from him with unexpected force. Do you think if I had known? He broke off, running a hand over his face in a gesture so human, so unlike the divine pharaoh, that Nayla felt her carefully constructed defenses weaken. What would you have done? She asked more gently. Truly. Kamet looked at her, his golden eyes reflecting the torchlight. I don't know, he admitted, but they are my blood, my heirs. They are girls, Nayla pointed out. Would Egypt accept female heirs? They would if I commanded it. There was steel in his voice now, the voice that had conquered nations. And what of me? Nayla asked quietly. Am I to remain in exile while you take my daughters? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of cedar oil and myrrh that had once been so much a part of her life. Come back with them, he said. Return to Wasit, to the palace. Nayla searched his face. As what? The forgiven, barren queen who miraculously produced heirs after all? The court has a new pecking order now, I'm sure. What place would there be for me? As my wife, Kamet said simply. As their mother. As the queen you always were. Before Nayla could respond, a commotion arose from the temple entrance. Menkuf appeared, looking apologetic but urgent. "My pharaoh, forgive the interruption. A messenger has arrived from Wasit. The matter is urgent. There has been movement on the northern border." Reality crashed back in. Kamit was not just a man discovering his children. He was the divine ruler of Egypt, with responsibilities that could not be set aside for personal matters. "We will continue this discussion," he told Nayla firmly. "I must attend to this, but I will return before leaving for Abunhet." As he strode away, Nayla watched him go, her emotions in turmoil. 5 years of carefully constructed peace had been shattered in an instant by his appearance. The simple life she had built, the routines that had sustained her through the pain of separation, now seemed like a fragile illusion. In the shadows of a nearby column, Maya appeared. "He knows now," she said. "Everything will change." "Yes," Nayla whispered, her eyes still following Kamit's retreating figure. "Everything." What neither of them realized was that among Kamit's entourage, a young scribe with sharp eyes and sharper ears had already dispatched a bird to Waset, carrying news that would set the royal court ablaze with speculation and reignite old ambitions long simmering beneath the surface of palace politics. In the quiet temple dedicated to Bastet, goddess of protection, 2 identical little girls dreamed of a palace by a river, while in the courtyard their parents, separated by years of misunderstanding and pride, stood at the precipice of a future neither had imagined possible. The temple of Bastet had never been intended for greatness. Unlike the colossal monuments to Amun-Ra or Osiris that dominated Wasit, this modest sanctuary had been built for quiet devotion, a place where the goddess's protection could be felt rather than marveled at. For the woman now known as Great Guardian Seret, this humble backdrop had become something far more precious than the alabaster grandeur she had once called home. It had become salvation. Dawn broke over the desert with a painter's deliberation, first tinting the horizon amber, then washing the dunes with gold. Nayla, for she was still Nayla in the privacy of her own thoughts, rose before the sun as she had every day for 5 years. Her chambers were simple: a reed mat for sleeping, a wooden chest containing her few possessions, and a small altar to Bastet, adorned with dried flowers and a carved cat figurine her daughters had made. "Another day in your grace, Mother Bastet," she whispered, lighting a stick of incense. The familiar ritual centered her, preparing her for what always proved to be long days, filled with both mundane tasks and the weighty responsibilities of spiritual leadership. The soft padding of small feet outside her door brought a smile to her lips. "Mother," came the whispered voice of Layla, always the earlier riser of the twins. "Are you awake? The sun is coming." "Come in, little one," Nayla called softly. The door swung open to reveal her daughter, hair still tousled from sleep, golden eyes bright with excitement. "Can we watch it together? From the high wall?" It was their special tradition, one that had begun when the girls were barely 3, climbing to the highest point of the temple complex to witness the sun's birth over the endless dunes. "Of course. Is your sister still sleeping?" Layla nodded, a conspiratorial smile playing at her lips. She was reading scrolls by lamplight again. Priestess Neferu caught her and made her recite extra prayers before bed. Nayla shook her head fondly. Zara's thirst for knowledge was insatiable, a trait she had inherited from her father, though Nayla tried not to dwell on such comparisons. Hand in hand, mother and daughter climbed the worn stone steps to the temple's eastern wall. Below them, the small community was already stirring, novice priestesses drawing water from the well, temple cats stretching in patches of emerging sunlight, the elderly herb keeper arranging her daily collection baskets. "Mother," Layla said suddenly, her voice taking on the thoughtful quality that often surprised those who mistook her quiet nature for simplicity, "do you ever miss being a queen?" The question caught Nayla off guard. She had always been honest with the girls about her past, though careful not to burden them with the full weight of their heritage. "Sometimes," she admitted, stroking Layla's hair, "I miss the gardens and the sound of the river. I miss certain people who were kind to me, but not the pharaoh." Layla's golden eyes, so like her father's, searched Nayla's face. A lump formed in Nayla's throat. "It's complicated, little lotus. Adults sometimes make mistakes that hurt each other, even when they once cared deeply. Is that why you never sent a message telling him about us?" The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze her. "Partly," Nayla acknowledged, "and partly because I feared what might happen If certain people at court learned about you, not everyone there wished me well. Like the bad vizier in your stories? The one with the jackal smile? Nayla couldn't help but smile at the description. Yes, like him. They fell silent as the sun finally crested the horizon, bathing them in warm light. Below, the temple came fully to life, the daily rhythm of prayers and duties beginning. We should go down, Nayla said finally. There's much to do before the village petitioners arrive. In the years since her exile, Nayla had transformed from disgraced queen to revered spiritual leader. The locals called her Seret, the Great Guardian, and came from miles around seeking her counsel and healing. She had discovered a talent for herbal medicine that, combined with her natural compassion and the wisdom born of suffering, made her something of a legend in the region. The irony wasn't lost on her, that in losing everything she had found a purpose and respect she'd never quite achieved as queen. By mid-morning, the temple courtyard was filled with supplicants, farmers seeking blessings for their crops, mothers with sick children, traders asking for protection on their journeys. All waited patiently for a moment with the famous priestess, whose touch was said to carry Bastet's favor. Great Guardian, called Neferu, the sharp-tongued priestess, who had been among the first to welcome Nayla 5 years ago. The mason's wife is here again. The child still doesn't thrive. Nayla nodded, washing her hands in a basin of water infused with healing herbs. Bring her to the inner chamber and fetch my blue remedy box. The mason's wife, Aset, was barely more than a girl herself, her thin face lined with worry far beyond her years. In her arms, she cradled an infant who seemed more spirit than flesh, his tiny form barely disturbing the swaddling clothes. Great Guardian, she whispered, tears already forming. He won't nurse. The village midwife says to prepare for his journey to the field of reeds, but I cannot let him go without trying everything. May I? Nayla asked gently, holding out her arms. The infant was indeed frighteningly light, his breathing shallow. Nayla examined him carefully, her fingers probing with the skill of long practice. When she placed her ear against his chest, she detected the faint murmur that confirmed her suspicions. His heart struggles, she explained, but he is fighting, this little warrior of yours. From her remedy box, she selected several dried herbs, grinding them into a fine powder, which she mixed with honey from the temple's hives. One small dab on his tongue, 4 times daily, she instructed. And this tea for you to strengthen your milk. Rub his feet with this oil before each feeding. It will help his life force circulate better. Will he live? Aset asked, the question barely audible. Nayla met her eyes steadily. That is in the hands of the gods, but I have seen sicker children recover with these remedies. Have faith and bring him back in 3 days. After Aset left, clutching her precious remedies and renewed hope, Nayla allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. In the palace, she had been surrounded by the finest physicians in Egypt, yet had learned more about healing in this humble temple than in all her years as queen. Mother! Zara's voice broke into her thoughts as her daughter burst into the chamber, scroll in hand. I found it! The passage about the cat goddess's dual nature. Nayla couldn't help but smile at her daughter's enthusiasm. Lower your voice in the inner sanctum, my fierce one, but show me what you've discovered. Zara unrolled the papyrus with careful hands. At 5, she already read better than many of the adult priestesses, devouring every scrap of written knowledge the modest temple library contained. See here, it says Bastet can be both gentle house cat and fierce lioness, protector of homes and destroyer of enemies. Her eyes shone with excitement. Is that why we pray to her both morning and night, for different aspects of her power? Precisely, Nayla confirmed, impressed yet again by her daughter's insight. All gods contain multitudes just as people do. We are never just one thing. Like you, Zara said matter-of-factly, you're our mother, but also the Great Guardian, and once you were a queen too. Before Nayla could respond to this simple but profound observation, Maya appeared at the doorway, her elderly face tight with concern. A moment, if you please, Great Guardian, she said formally, though her eyes conveyed a different message. Nayla nodded. Continue your studies, Zara. We'll discuss this further at evening meal. Once they were alone in the corridor, Maya's formal demeanor dropped. He's still here, she whispered urgently. The pharaoh sent most of his party ahead to Abunhet, but he remains with only his personal guard. He's requested a private audience with you in the sacred garden. Nayla's heart quickened traitorously. Did he say why? No, but he looked determined. Maya squeezed her hand. What will you do? What indeed? The question echoed in Nayla's mind as she made her way to the temple's innermost garden, a peaceful oasis where medicinal plants grew alongside flowers maintained purely for their beauty, a small luxury she had introduced from her palace days. Kamit stood with his back to her, examining a blue lotus bloom with apparent fascination. Without his crown and ceremonial garb, dressed simply in a white kilt and sandals, he looked almost like the young prince she had fallen in love with, before power and duty had carved new lines into his face. "These don't grow naturally in the desert," he observed without turning. "You must work hard to keep them alive here." "Some things are worth the effort," Nayla replied, keeping her distance. He turned then, his golden eyes, so like their daughters, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Indeed they are. Why are you still here, Kamit? Your irrigation projects await. They can continue without my physical presence. This matter cannot." He gestured to a stone bench beneath a young sycamore tree, another of her carefully nurtured transplants from the Nile Valley. "Will you sit with me?" Reluctantly, Nayla sat, maintaining a careful distance between them. The last time they had been alone together had been the night before her banishment, a night of bitter words and broken promises. "I have been speaking with the children," Kamit began. "They are remarkable, intelligent, poised, curious, everything royal children should be." "They are not royal children," Nayla corrected sharply. "They are temple children, daughters of Bastet. They have my eyes, Nayla, my bloodline. My heritage flows through their veins whether you acknowledge it or not." His voice remained calm, but she could detect the underlying steel. "They are princesses of Egypt. They are 5-year-old girls who have known nothing but peace and simplicity. Would you drag them into the viper's nest of court politics, subject them to the scrutiny and judgment that comes with royal blood? "I would give them their birthright," he countered, "an education beyond what this temple can provide, the finest tutors, exposure to art and architecture and governance, the chance to someday lead." Nayla laughed, though there was little humor in it. "Lead? As women? Egypt has never accepted a female pharaoh. Things change, traditions evolve." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "But more importantly, they deserve to know their father, and I deserve the chance to know my daughters." The raw emotion in his voice caught her off guard. This was not the cold, calculated pharaoh who had banished her. This was something else, something closer to the man she had once pledged her life to. "And what of me?" she asked quietly. "What place is there for the disgraced queen in this vision of yours?" Kamit reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she allowed the contact. His palm was warm against hers, calloused in new places, evidence that he no longer spent his days solely on a throne. "Your place is where it always should have been," he said, "by my side. The girls need their mother. And I—" He paused, seeming to struggle with words that once would have come easily between them. "I have missed you, Nayla, more than I allowed myself to admit." 1,000 memories flooded her mind, tender moments and passionate nights, shared laughter and quiet understandings, but also the bitter end, the public humiliation, the long, lonely journey into exile. "You cast me aside," she reminded him, though without the anger such words would have held even a year ago. "Like a broken vessel no longer fit for purpose." "I was wrong," he said simply, "blinded by expectation and bad counsel. I cannot undo that wrong, but I can try to make amends. Come back to Wasset, not as a supplicant, but as my queen, as the mother of my heirs." Before she could respond, a commotion at the garden entrance drew their attention. Maya hurried toward them, her expression grave. "Forgive the interruption," she gasped, clearly having run from somewhere. "Riders from Wasset have arrived. They bear the vizier's seal." Kamit's expression darkened. "Rahotep sends messengers without my authorization." "It seems so, my lord," Maya confirmed. "And there is more. They are asking questions in the village about the Great Guardian and her children." The implication was clear. Word had somehow reached the capital about the pharaoh's discovery. "How is this possible?" Nayla asked, rising to her feet. "You said your party was discreet." "There are always eyes and ears," Kamit replied grimly. "And Rahotep has cultivated many over the years." He turned to Maya. "Are my guards intercepting these messengers?" "Yes, my lord. Captain Menkaf is detaining them at the temple gates." "Good. I must speak with them." He turned back to Nayla, his expression now that of a ruler facing a threat. "This changes things. If Rahotep already suspects, we have less time than I thought." "For what?" Nayla demanded. "To secure your position and that of our daughters. The vizier will already be planting seeds of doubt among the council. We must return to Wasit immediately and take control of the narrative. Fear, cold and familiar, gripped Nayla's heart. The girls are not ready for this. I am not ready. Kamet took both her hands in his gaze intense. I failed to protect you once. I will not fail again, any of you. But we must act quickly. In that moment, looking into the eyes of the man who had once been her world, Nayla felt the carefully constructed walls of her temple existence begin to crumble. For 5 years, she had been Seret, great guardian and healer. The role had given her purpose, respect, and a measure of peace. But she had always known, in the deepest corners of her heart, that this sanctuary was temporary, that the blood that flowed in her daughter's veins would someday call them back to their heritage. She had simply hoped for more time, more years of simple joys and uncomplicated love, before the weight of royal destiny descended upon their small shoulders. They will need to know everything, she said finally, about who they truly are, about us, about why I left. Yes, Kamet agreed solemnly. No more secrets. As they stood together in the garden sanctuary, surrounded by Nayla's carefully tended piece of paradise in the desert, the distant sound of temple bells called the priestesses to midday prayers. For 5 years, that sound had ordered Nayla's days, giving structure to a life rebuilt from ashes. Now, like sand through an hourglass, her time as Seret was running out. I need to tell the children myself, she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. And I cannot leave this place without ensuring the temple's future. These people depend on me. Of course, Kamet nodded, but we cannot delay long. By sundown tomorrow, we must be on the road to Wasit. As he spoke, a temple cat wandered into the garden, rubbing against Nayla's ankles before fixing Kamet with an appraising stare. In the lore of Bastet, cats were said to see beyond human masks to the true heart beneath. Even the goddess weighs your worth, Nayla observed with the ghost of a smile. Kamet knelt slowly, extending his hand to the animal. After a moment's consideration, the cat butted its head against his fingers, purring loudly. Perhaps she remembers me, he said softly. I visited her temples often enough after you left, seeking, I'm not sure what, understanding perhaps, or forgiveness. The simple admission, more than any grand declaration, touched something deep within Nayla's heart. This humbled pharaoh kneeling before a temple cat was far from the cold ruler who had banished her. Time and loss had changed them both. What neither of them could know, as they stood at this crossroads between past and future, was that far away in Wasit, the High Council was already gathering an emergency session, summoned by a vizier whose carefully laid plans spanning 5 years were suddenly threatened by the pharaoh's unexpected discovery in the desert. The political machinery of the most powerful civilization in the known world was grinding into motion, and at its center stood 2 5-year-old girls who had never known anything beyond the quiet rhythms of temple life. For Nayla, who had built a life of meaning from the wreckage of her former existence, the prospect of returning to that world filled her with both dread and a strange sense of inevitability. The peaceful chapter of her life in the shadow of the temple was ending, and what lay ahead was as vast and unpredictable as the desert itself. The council chamber of Wasit gleamed with polished limestone and gold leaf, its walls adorned with scenes of pharaohs past communing with the gods. Massive columns carved to resemble papyrus stalks stretched toward the painted ceiling, where the goddess Nut arched her star-studded body across the heavens. It was a room designed to humble those who entered, a reminder that while men might govern, the gods ruled all. For Rahotep, sumo vizier to Pharaoh Kamet, the chamber had long ago lost its power to inspire awe. After 30 years navigating the treacherous waters of court politics, he saw it merely as a stage, one on which he had performed masterfully for decades. My esteemed colleagues, he addressed the semicircle of 12 elderly men who comprised the High Council of Egypt. I have called this extraordinary session due to disturbing news from the Western Territories. The councillors shifted uneasily on their cushioned seats. Extraordinary sessions were rare, typically reserved for matters of war or succession. Several exchanged worried glances. What news could be so urgent? Asked Amenemhat, the eldest councillor, his rheumy eyes narrowing beneath heavy lids. Our borders are secure, the treasury full. The pharaoh himself is merely on a routine inspection of Abu Het. Rahotep allowed a calculated pause before responding, his thin lips pressed together in what appeared to be reluctance. a carefully crafted expression he had perfected over years of court intrigue. "It seems," he finally continued, "that our divine ruler has made an unexpected discovery, one that could threaten the very stability of our kingdom." Now he had their full attention. 12 pairs of eyes fixed on him with varying degrees of concern and curiosity. "Speak plainly, Vizier," commanded Nachtmin, the gruff military commander whose scarred face reflected decades of battles. "What has Pharaoh Kamet found?" Rahotep moved to the center of the chamber, where sunlight streaming through high alabaster windows cast him in dramatic illumination. Theatrics mattered in politics as much as substance, a lesson he had learned early in his career. "Children," he said simply. "His children." With the former Queen Nile, the chamber erupted in exclamations of shock and disbelief. Servants standing discreetly along the walls suddenly found the floor patterns fascinating, though their ears strained to catch every word. "Impossible," declared Amenemhat. "The woman was barren. That was why she was sent away." "So we all believed," Rahotep agreed smoothly. "Yet my sources confirm the pharaoh has discovered twin daughters, now 5 years of age, living with the former queen at a temple of Bastet, children who bear the distinctive golden eyes of the royal bloodline." "How can this be?" asked Nakapthor, the treasury minister, his jeweled fingers unconsciously touching the amulet at his throat. "If the queen was with child when she left, then someone kept this information from our divine ruler." Rahotep completed the thought, his voice a perfect blend of concern and righteous indignation. A deception, most foul. What he carefully omitted was his own role in that deception. The intercepted message from Maya, the tablet buried among his most secret possessions. Some truths were best left unspoken, even in the privileged confines of the council chamber. "Where is the pharaoh now?" demanded Nachtmin. "Has he returned with these children?" "My sources indicate he remains at the temple, presumably making arrangements for their return." Rahotep's tone suggested this was precisely the problem. Without the proper protocols, without the sacred rites of recognition that tradition demands. Ipi, the high priest of Amun, who had until now remained silent, leaned forward. His shaved head gleamed in the sunlight, the leopard skin draped across his shoulders, marking his exalted spiritual position. "If these children truly carry royal blood," he intoned, his deep voice resonating in the chamber, "then their existence is a matter for divine interpretation. The gods must be consulted before they set foot in Waset." Rahotep inclined his head respectfully toward the priest. Ipi had been a useful ally over the years, easily swayed by appeals to tradition and protocol, and the occasional generous donation to his temple. "The high priest speaks wisdom, as always," Rahotep agreed, "which is why I felt compelled to bring this matter before the council immediately. If the pharaoh returns with these children, and their mother, without proper preparation, it could create complications." "What sort of complications?" Nakapthor pressed, ever the pragmatist. Rahotep spread his hands in a gesture of concerned uncertainty. "Consider the implications, esteemed counselors. For 5 years, Egypt has accepted that Queen Nile was unable to bear children. Many noble families have presented their daughters as potential new queens, anticipating a royal wedding that would secure their position at court. The pharaoh himself has entertained such possibilities." He paused, allowing this reminder to sink in. Several counselors nodded, no doubt thinking of their own granddaughters or nieces who had been carefully groomed for royal consideration. "And now suddenly the disgraced former queen reappears with royal heirs?" Rahotep continued. "Heirs who are female, no less. It defies precedent. It undermines the natural order the gods have established." "Not entirely unprecedented," countered Ipuki, the royal scribe speaking for the first time. Unlike most counselors, who had achieved their positions through noble birth or wealth, Ipuki had risen through scholarship and intellect. The records speak of female regents in our distant past, and Queen Nile's lineage is impeccable, descended from the royal house of Avaris. Rahotep fixed the scribe with a cold stare. Ipuki had always been problematic, too concerned with historical accuracy over practical politics. "Ancient anomalies do not justify modern disruption," he replied smoothly. "And we must consider an even more troubling possibility. What if these children are not truly of royal blood?" A murmur rippled through the council. "You suggest deception?" Nachtmin's gruff voice hardened further. "That the former queen would present false heirs. I merely suggest that after 5 years in exile, a woman might go to desperate lengths to regain her position," Rahotep said carefully. "Golden eyes can be explained by many things, not all of them royal lineage. Old Amenemhat thumped his walking staff against the floor. This is dangerous talk, Vizier. If the pharaoh believes these children are his, our divine ruler's heart may be clouded by old affections. Rahotep interrupted gently. Remember how he favored Nile above all others, how devastated he was when she proved barren. Might he not be vulnerable to a carefully crafted deception? The counselors exchanged troubled glances. All had witnessed the pharaoh's deep melancholy following Nile's banishment, a melancholy that had gradually hardened into the stern, sometimes harsh ruler Kamet had become. What would you have us do, Vizier? Asked Uzamontu, the agricultural minister, who had remained silent until now. We cannot countermand the pharaoh's wishes if he chooses to restore the former queen and recognize these children. Here was the moment Rahotep had carefully orchestrated, the opening for his true purpose in calling the council together. Of course not, he agreed solemnly, but we can insist on proper procedures, sacred traditions that protect the divine bloodline. He turned to Ipi. The high priest knows the ancient rites for verifying royal lineage, does he not? Ipi straightened, clearly pleased to have his expertise acknowledged. The ceremony of divine blood, he confirmed, not performed in 3 generations, but the texts remain in the sacred library. It requires preparation, specific offerings, the alignment of certain stars. How long would such preparations take? Rahotep asked, though he already knew the answer. A full lunar cycle at minimum, Ipi replied thoughtfully, possibly longer given that the rituals must be adapted for female children. A month, mused Rahotep, during which time propriety would suggest the former queen and the children remain in seclusion, undergoing purification rites before being presented to court or public. Nakpthor frowned. You propose to separate them from the pharaoh for a month. He will not be pleased. Not separated, Rahotep corrected smoothly. Merely housed in the temple of Hathor, as tradition demands, with limited contact until the ceremony is complete, for their own protection and spiritual preparation. He could see the council wavering, torn between concern over the pharaoh's reaction and their deep-seated adherence to tradition and protocol. It was time for his final gambit. There is one more matter to consider, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that forced the councillors to lean forward. If these children are indeed of royal blood, what does that tell us about the past 5 years? Confusion flickered across several faces. It means, Rahotep explained softly, that our divine ruler banished his pregnant queen based on incorrect information, that the gods blessed their union with not 1 but 2 royal children, yet they have been raised in obscurity, denied their birthright. How will the people view this? How will history judge such a profound error? The implication was clear. Not just the pharaoh's judgment would be questioned, but that of his advisors, many of whom sat in this very chamber. Perhaps, Rahotep continued into the heavy silence, it would be best for all if this matter were handled with the utmost discretion. If the proper rituals were observed, giving everyone, including our divine ruler, time to prepare for such a momentous change in circumstances. One by one, he watched understanding dawn in their eyes. This wasn't just about succession or tradition. It was about saving face, about rewriting a potential embarrassment into a triumphant return sanctified by the gods. The vizier speaks wisdom, Ipi pronounced finally. The sacred rituals must be observed, for the sake of the divine bloodline and the stability of Egypt. Others nodded in agreement, relief evident in their expressions. Rahotep had given them a path that protected their own positions while appearing to uphold tradition and protocol. Then we are agreed, he asked, glancing around the circle. We will prepare a formal recommendation to the pharaoh, citing the ancient texts and the necessity of proper verification through sacred ritual. Agreed, came the chorus of voices. Only Ipuki, the royal scribe, seemed troubled, his stylus tapping thoughtfully against his writing palette. Should we not at least send a welcoming party, he suggested, to escort the royal family back to Waset with appropriate honor? An excellent suggestion, Rahotep conceded magnanimously. I will personally select a suitable escort, one that understands the delicate nature of this situation and the importance of proper protocol. In truth, he had already prepared orders for his most trusted guards, men who understood that their loyalty was to the vizier first, Egypt second, and the pharaoh third. They would ensure that Nile and her daughters were brought directly to the temple of Hathor, without any unfortunate detours that might allow the former queen to rally old allies or speak privately with court officials. As the council session concluded, Rahotep remained behind, ostensibly to draft the formal recommendation. When the last councillor had departed, he moved to a small side chamber concealed behind a decorative screen, a room known to few, with walls thick enough to ensure privacy. There, a slender figure awaited, draped in the fine linen of nobility. Lady Nebet, daughter of the governor of Lower Egypt, had been Rahotep's most promising candidate for the next queen. Beautiful, politically advantageous, and, most importantly, utterly beholden to Rahotep for her position at court. "Well?" she demanded, dark eyes flashing impatiently. "Is it true? The desert queen returns with brats in tow?" "It appears so," Rahotep confirmed, his formal manner dropping away in private. "But the situation remains manageable." "Manageable," Nebet hissed, pacing the small chamber like a caged leopard. "I have spent 3 years cultivating the pharaoh's interest. 3 years of poetry recitations and demure smiles and listening to endless accounts of military campaigns. And now this desert witch returns with ready-made heirs? Calm yourself," Rahotep advised coldly. "Nothing is certain yet. The children must be verified, their bloodline confirmed. Much can happen in a lunar cycle." "What are you planning?" she asked, her anger giving way to calculation. Rahotep smiled thinly. "Nothing that concerns you directly, but I would suggest you continue your efforts with the pharaoh, with appropriate sympathy for his complicated situation. A man facing such a public reconciliation might appreciate a private understanding ear." Nebet's expression shifted from fury to cunning. "You think I might still have a chance, even with the mother of his children returned? Nile has been living as a priestess in the desert for 5 years, Rahotep pointed out. She is no longer the fresh young beauty who captured the pharaoh's heart. And men, even divine ones, are notoriously susceptible to newer attractions, especially when older ones are associated with painful memories. This was particularly true of Kemet, whose pride had been deeply wounded by Nile's supposed barrenness. Even if he accepted the children as his, the humiliation of having banished his pregnant queen would not be easily forgotten or forgiven. "What of the children?" Nebet asked. "If they are confirmed as royal heirs, they are girls," Rahotep reminded her. "Unusual, but not insurmountable as a political obstacle. A new queen could still provide a male heir, the true need of the dynasty." Nebet nodded slowly, her equilibrium returning as she considered this angle. "And if they prove inconvenient?" "I did not hear that question," Rahotep replied sharply. "Nor would I ever entertain such thoughts about children of potential royal blood. The gods frown upon such impiety." His tone made it clear the conversation had ventured into dangerous territory, not for moral reasons, but practical ones. Walls could have ears, even in secret chambers. "Of course," Nebet conceded smoothly. "I speak only from shock. The children, whatever their parentage, are innocent and to be cherished." Rahotep nodded approvingly at this public suitable statement. "Return to your chambers and prepare yourself. When the pharaoh returns, there will be confusion, strong emotions, many voices competing for his ear. Yours should be a calm one, sympathetic to all sides while remaining steadfastly devoted to his well-being." After Nebet departed, Rahotep remained alone in the small chamber, mentally reviewing the pieces on his political game board. For 5 years he had maintained his position of unparalleled influence over Kemet, filling the void left by Nile's departure. The pharaoh, wounded by what he believed was his wife's failure and the gods' disfavor, had thrown himself into military campaigns and building projects, leaving domestic governance increasingly in Rahotep's capable hands. The return of Nile threatened everything, not because she had been particularly politically adept as queen, but because she had understood Kemet in ways no one else did. She had seen through Rahotep's machinations, had warned her husband against his counsel on numerous occasions. If she regained her former influence, no, it would not come to that. The High Council had been successfully maneuvered into supporting a month-long ceremonial verification, time enough to implement more permanent solutions to the Nile problem. As for the children, Rahotep frowned slightly. He had never imagined his deception would lead to this complexity. Hidden royal heirs were the stuff of palace intrigue tales, not real political challenges he had expected to face. Still, every problem contained within it the seed of opportunity. Perhaps these girls could be useful. Royal blood had value, especially when properly married to strengthen alliances, assuming, of course, that they truly were of royal blood. Despite his insinuations to the council, Rahotep had little doubt about their parentage. His spy's descriptions of golden eyes identical to Kamet's left little room for question, but truth had always been a flexible concept in politics. It was perception that mattered. And perceptions could be managed, shaped, even completely transformed with the right combination of whispers, rituals, and carefully orchestrated events. Outside the council chamber, the day continued in its ordered rhythms. Servants prepared the palace for evening. Merchants in the city began closing their stalls. Farmers in the fields looked toward home. None yet knew that their world was about to change, that the delicate balance of power maintained for 5 years was on the verge of dramatic upheaval. In his private quarters that evening, Rahotep unrolled a papyrus and began composing the orders for his escort party. They would depart at first light, traveling swiftly to intercept the pharaoh's party before it could reach Wasit. The wording had to be perfect, respectful, traditional, unimpeachable in its adherence to protocol. What was left unwritten were the private instructions for the captain. Ensure Nile had no opportunity for private communications. Keep the children isolated from all but approved attendants. Report every word, every gesture back to Rahotep directly. In the game of power that never ceased within the shining walls of Wasit, the vizier had just been handed both his greatest challenge and his greatest opportunity. Like a master Senate player, he was already planning 5 moves ahead, moves that would determine not just his own fate, but that of the royal family and perhaps Egypt itself. As night fell over the palace, servants lit oil lamps that cast long shadows across hieroglyph-covered walls, shadows that seemed to move with lives of their own, enacting ancient dramas of betrayal, ambition, and power. The gods painted above watched impassively, having seen it all before in the never-ending cycle of human striving. Far away in the desert, a former queen prepared her daughters for a journey into a world they had never known, unaware that the vizier's web was already being spun, its sticky strands waiting to entangle all who entered the gleaming city on the Nile. The morning light filtered through the high windows of Rahotep's private study, casting narrow beams across the polished cedar floor. The vizier sat at his writing table, fingers steepled beneath his chin, contemplating the small clay tablet before him. It was an unremarkable object, no larger than his palm, its surface covered in the careful hieratic script of a practiced scribe. Yet this modest tablet had altered the course of Egypt's royal family and by extension the kingdom itself. 5 years, Rahotep murmured, tracing his finger over the faded symbols. 5 years since you came into my possession. A soft knock at the door interrupted his contemplation. Enter, he called, quickly covering the tablet with a sheet of papyrus. Hori, his most trusted personal servant, stepped into the room and bowed deeply. Forgive the intrusion, Great One. The Pharaoh's advance messenger has arrived. The royal party approaches the city gates. They will arrive by midday. Rahotep nodded, his face betraying nothing of the calculations racing through his mind. And the escort I sent to meet them. They have joined the Pharaoh's procession, my lord. The former queen and the royal children are traveling in a closed litter, as you instructed. Excellent. You may go. As Hori backed respectfully from the room, Rahotep's gaze returned to the concealed tablet. Soon, very soon, this small object would either become his most valuable possession or his most dangerous liability. Across the city, in a modest dwelling near the temple district, an elderly woman named Maya sat surrounded by her few possessions, methodically packing them into a woven reed basket. After 5 years in the desert, she had never expected to see Wasit again. Yet here she was, preparing to re-enter the world she had left behind. Are you certain about this, old friend? Asked Neferu, the sharp-tongued priestess who had accompanied them from the temple. You could remain with us at the temple of Hathor. The queen, forgive me, the great guardian, would surely prefer to have you near. Maya's weathered hands paused in their work. I have duties beyond attending Nile, she said quietly. Matters left unfinished when we fled to the desert. Neferu raised an eyebrow. Mysterious words from one so typically straightforward. Some burdens are best carried alone, Maya replied. She glanced toward a small wooden box tucked among her belongings. A box containing the duplicate tablet she had created 5 years earlier, its twin sent to the pharaoh but never received. The gods move in patterns beyond our understanding, she continued. Perhaps our return to Wasit was always part of their design. Or perhaps the pharaoh's sudden appearance at our temple was merely the random cruelty of fate, Neferu countered dryly. Either way, we are here now, and the Great Council insists on this month-long verification ritual, a transparent delay tactic if ever I saw one. Maya smiled faintly. You've retained your skepticism despite years of temple service. The gods appreciate clear sight as much as blind faith, Neferu retorted, and I see trouble brewing in this gleaming city. The vizier's fingerprints are everywhere. She lowered her voice, though they were alone in the small room. Even on this so-called escort that separated us from Nile and the children as soon as we reached the city borders. Indeed, Maya closed her basket with decisive finality, which is why I must act quickly. Act? What do you mean to do? Neferu asked, concern replacing her usual sardonic expression. Maya rose stiffly to her feet, her old joints protesting the movement. What I should have done 5 years ago, ensure the truth reaches those who need to hear it. Elsewhere in the vast city, in the luxurious guest pavilion of the Temple of Hathor, Nayla stood at a window overlooking a garden courtyard, watching her daughters explore their new surroundings with wide-eyed wonderment. They were experiencing so many firsts. First time in a proper city, first time seeing the great river Nile, first time wearing the fine linen garments befitting their true status. Look, mother, Zara called, pointing to a lotus pond where ibises waded regally through the shallows. The sacred birds are so close. They're much bigger than in the scrolls, added Layla, who held tightly to her sister's hand as they navigated this strange new world together. Nayla smiled and waved, but remained inside as instructed by the high priest of Hathor. The purification ritual required limited contact with the outside world, a restriction that conveniently kept her isolated from potential allies in the city. Her daughters were allowed in the garden only because children were considered naturally pure, though even they were forbidden from interacting with anyone save their designated attendants. They seemed to be adjusting well, observed Kamet, who stood in the doorway watching the tableau. Nayla turned, startled by his sudden appearance. Despite the high priest's restrictions, the pharaoh had insisted on visitation rights, a concession reluctantly granted, though always under the watchful eyes of temple guardians and counselors. Children adapt more easily than adults, she replied, keeping her voice neutral. Everything is an adventure to them. Kamet moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could detect the familiar scent of cedar and myrrh that clung to his robes. And you? How are you adapting to this return? I have had less than a day to adapt, Nayla pointed out, and most of that spent in enforced isolation. The council insists these rituals are necessary, Kamet said, a hint of apology in his tone, to formally establish the children's lineage beyond question. And you? Do you question their lineage? Nayla asked, turning to face him directly. Kamet's golden eyes, so like their daughters, met hers without wavering. Not for a moment, but political necessities have always dictated our lives, she finished for him. I remember well how political necessity sent me into the desert 5 years ago. A shadow crossed his face. That was different. I was misled by Rahotep, Nayla stated flatly. The same man who now orchestrates this verification ritual to keep us separated from you and the court. You always distrusted him, Kamet acknowledged. Perhaps with reason. More than perhaps, Nayla murmured, turning back to the window. Below, the girls had discovered a family of cats lounging in a patch of sunlight, temple cats sacred to Bastet, who had been their constant companions in the desert. The familiar sight amid so much strangeness seemed to comfort them. There is something you should know, Kamet said after a moment of silence. Something I discovered only after your departure. Something in his voice made Nayla turn back to him, her full attention captured. What is it? The oracles I consulted, the priests who declared you barren, they were all appointed on Rahotep's recommendation. When I reviewed the temple records years later, I found inconsistencies, suggestions of interference. Nayla felt her breath catch. You believe he deliberately arranged false prophecies, false medical verdicts. I cannot prove it, Kamet admitted. But the pattern became clear only in retrospect. He isolated me from those who might have counseled patience, surrounded me with voices insisting on the necessity of a new queen. Yet you kept him as vizier, Nayla observed, keeping her voice carefully free of accusation. One does not discard a snake until one has firm grasp of its tail, Kamet replied, using an old Egyptian proverb. Better to keep potential enemies close where their movements can be observed. Below in the garden, Layla had coaxed one of the temple cats into her lap and was stroking it gently while Zara attempted to entice another with a twig dangled temptingly above its paws. They have your way with animals, Kamet observed, his voice softening. I remember how even the most skittish palace cats would come to you. The unexpected memory, intimate, domestic, from the happy early years of their marriage caught Nile off guard. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the young prince who had courted her with poetry and midnight walks along the Nile, whose laughter had once come easily, whose touch had been tender rather than commanding. "Much has changed," she said quietly. "Yes," he agreed, "but perhaps not everything." His hand moved as if to touch hers, then halted, remembering the watchful eyes of the temple guardians stationed discreetly around the pavilion. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Ipi, the high priest of Amun, his shaved head gleaming in the sunlight streaming through the windows. He bowed perfunctorily to Nile before addressing the pharaoh directly. "Divine One, the council awaits your presence. The preparations for tomorrow's initial purification ceremony require your approval." "Of course," Kamet replied, his voice and posture immediately shifting back to the formal pharaonic mode that had become his default in public. He nodded briefly to Nile. "We will continue our discussion later." As they departed, Nile returned her attention to the garden, where her daughters now sat surrounded by no fewer than 4 temple cats, all apparently entranced by the girl's gentle attention. The scene would have brought her joy under different circumstances, her children surrounded by sacred animals in a beautiful garden. But the high walls topped with guardian statues reminded her that this was as much prison as sanctuary. Across the city, in a crowded market street, Maya made her way slowly through the press of bodies, her plain priestess robes and elderly appearance rendering her nearly invisible among the more colorful and vigorous market-goers. This anonymity suited her purposes perfectly as she navigated toward a particular narrow alley off the main thoroughfare. The shop she sought was unmarked, except for a small carved ankh above the doorway, a symbol that, to the initiated, identified the proprietor as more than a simple scribe. Djar had been old when Maya was young, yet somehow he persisted decade after decade, his knowledge of palace intrigues and city secrets unmatched by any living person. A small bell tinkled as she entered the dim interior, where the smell of papyrus, ink, and the distinctive clay used for fine tablets mingled in the still air. Behind a workbench strewn with writing implements sat a figure so ancient he seemed more mummy than man, his parchment-thin skin stretched over prominent bones, eyes milky with advanced cataracts. "Who comes to old Jar?" he croaked, his head turning not toward the door but to the sound of the bell. "A ghost from the western desert," Maya replied, using the coded greeting they had established decades ago when both served in the royal household under Kamet's father. The ancient scribe straightened slightly, his blind eyes widening. "Maya, is it truly you? The Queen's woman?" "The very same," she confirmed, approaching his bench. "Though much has happened since we last spoke." "So I have heard," Jar wheezed, a rattling laugh escaping his thin lips. "The Desert Queen returns with royal cubs in tow. The palace practically vibrates with the whispers." "Then you know why I've come," Maya said, reaching into her robes to withdraw the small wooden box. "You seek authentication," Jar guessed, his head tilting bird-like as he listened to her movements. "Something to verify the children's royal status, perhaps? A birth record?" "No," Maya corrected, opening the box to reveal the clay tablet nestled within. "I seek to authenticate this, and then ensure it reaches the pharaoh's hands directly, bypassing certain intercepting fingers." Though blind, Jar's hands were still remarkably sensitive and dexterous. He reached out and Maya placed the tablet on his outstretched palm. His fingers moved over the surface, reading the hieratic script through touch as easily as others might read with their eyes. "Ah," he breathed as he deciphered the message. "The Queen's own declaration of her condition, dated before her exile. And you had this all along?" "I made 2 copies," Maya explained. "One I sent to the pharaoh immediately following our departure for the desert. When no response came, I suspected interference but could do nothing from exile. I kept this duplicate safe, waiting for an opportunity." Jar's fingers continued their delicate exploration of the tablet. "Yes, this is genuine. The clay is of the royal household type, the seal impression authentic. The script," he paused, his expression sharpening. "This is your hand, not the Queen's. I wrote at her dictation," Maya confirmed. "She was too ill with early pregnancy sickness to hold the stylus steady." The old scribe nodded slowly. "A factor that works in our favor. Your particular writing style is known to many who served in the palace. Combined with the royal clay and seal, it creates a document difficult to dismiss as forgery. Then you will help me ensure it reaches the pharaoh." Jar carefully placed the tablet back in its box. For 50 years I have served the truth, even when it was inconvenient to those in power. I see no reason to abandon that practice now, particularly when royal children are involved." He closed the box with decisive finality. "Return tomorrow. I will have made arrangements." As Maya exited the shop, she failed to notice the slender figure who detached from the shadows of a nearby stall, following her with the practiced stealth of one trained in palace espionage. Rahotep's web of informants extended throughout the city, with particular concentration around the shops and homes of those who had once served the royal household. Back in his private study, the vizier was reviewing the formal protocol for the next day's ceremony when his personal guard captain arrived, his expression serious. "Report," Rahotep commanded without preamble. "The former handmaiden, Maya, visited Jar the scribe," the captain stated. "She carried a small box, contents unknown." Rahotep's eyes narrowed. "Jar, the old blind man who served as royal record keeper under the previous pharaoh." "The same, my lord. Our follower could not get close enough to overhear their conversation, but the woman appeared anxious, looking frequently over her shoulder as she traveled through the market." "Did she return to the Temple of Hathor afterward?" "No, my lord. She has taken private lodgings in the temple district, not far from the royal physician's home." Rahotep tapped his fingers thoughtfully against his writing table. "Interesting choice of residence," he mused, "and interesting choice of associate. Jar has always maintained careful neutrality in court politics, which means he cannot be trusted to remain silent if presented with compelling evidence." He rose from his seat, moving to the window that overlooked the palace complex and, beyond it, the sprawling city that was the heart of Egyptian power. In the distance, the distinctive white limestone of the Temple of Hathor gleamed in the afternoon sun, where Nile and her daughters were being held in ritual seclusion. "Increase surveillance on the old woman," he instructed. "I want to know everyone she speaks with, everywhere she goes, and find out what was in that box." "Yes, my lord." The captain bowed and withdrew, leaving Rahotep alone with his increasingly complicated calculations. He returned to his writing table, removing the covering papyrus to reveal the original tablet, the one intercepted 5 years ago, its message never delivered, the twin to whatever Maya had carried to Jar. "So you made a duplicate, clever old woman," he murmured, tracing the hieratic symbols that declared Naila's pregnancy in formal legal terms. "A precaution I would have taken myself." The existence of a second tablet complicated matters considerably. The original had been easy to intercept. A single messenger dispatched in haste from a newly exiled queen had been simple to waylay. But now, with Maya physically in Waset, with access to those who could authenticate the tablet and potentially deliver it directly to the pharaoh, Rahotep's mouth tightened into a thin line. He had not maintained his position of power for 3 decades by failing to anticipate complications. Contingency plans had already been formulated, should certain inconvenient truths come to light. The question was no longer whether to implement those plans, but how quickly they needed to be set in motion. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the city, the various players in this royal drama continued their separate movements, each unaware of the full pattern being woven by the hands of fate and the scheming vizier who sought to control that pattern. In the Temple of Hathor, Nile gathered her daughters close, telling them ancient stories of the gods to distract them from the strangeness of their new surroundings. In the palace, Kamet endured the tedious council meeting while his thoughts remained with the family so recently discovered and so quickly regulated by protocol. In his private study, Rahotep finalized plans that would ensure his continued influence, regardless of what revelations might emerge. And in a modest room in the temple district, Maya carefully unwrapped a small bundle of herbs, not for medicine or cooking, but for protection. The old ways, the ways of magic that predated even the current gods, had been her first training before she entered royal service. Those skills, long unused but never forgotten, might prove necessary in the coming days. "For protection," she whispered, lighting a small brazier and casting the herbs onto the coals. As the pungent smoke curled upward, she closed her eyes and shaped an ancient prayer with lips that had not spoken such words in decades. The tablet she had entrusted to Jar might prove to be either salvation or destruction. Only the gods, and perhaps the vizier, knew which. The royal barge cut through the Nile, crowds lining the banks to glimpse the exiled queen's return. Under the canopy, Kamet stood in full regalia beside Nayla, who felt foreign in royal garments after years in simple priestess robes. Behind them, the twins clutched hands, wide-eyed at the spectacle. At the palace dock, a reception line awaited, all perfect political masks concealing skepticism and hostility. Rahotep stood front and center, his words flawlessly diplomatic, yet venomous. Kamet deftly sidestepped the vizier's attempt to delay them with ceremony, prioritizing his family's comfort. Inside the palace, memory overwhelmed Nayla. The incense, polished floors, filtered light through alabaster screens. They were led to neutral quarters. Neither rejecting nor fully embracing her former status, Maya visited secretly, reporting city gossip and palace divisions. Lady Nebet, the governor's daughter who'd positioned herself as the next queen, made a thinly veiled confrontational visit. At the evening ceremony, the high priest demanded the princesses undergo a month-long verification ritual, separated from their parents. Kamet countered with a compromise that maintained tradition while keeping the girls under royal protection each night. Throughout the feast, Nayla navigated treacherous court politics, rebuilding alliances, while Kamet did the same. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded hall, acknowledging the battlefield they now faced together, despite their complicated past. The Temple of Anubis stood at the city's edge, where fertile land met desert, a threshold befitting the jackal god who guarded the boundary between life and death. Dawn revealed a solemn procession approaching its black granite entrance. Pharaoh Kamet, Queen Nayla and their daughters surrounded by priests, nobles and guards. Inside the sacred chamber, ancient stone walls were painted with judgment scenes, souls weighed against the feather of truth. The princesses gripped their mother's hands as High Priest Amenemhat, older than even the council elders, approached with ceremonial daggers. 3 drops from each, he explained. Royal blood reveals its divinity when tested. The ritual was swift, a small prick on each royal finger, blood collected in alabaster dishes mixed with sacred oils. The priest added papyrus ashes, natron, and finally, water from the Nile's source. The chamber fell silent as the mixtures separated, royal blood forming distinctive patterns, recognized by temple oracles. When the patterns matched perfectly between father and daughters, gasps echoed through the chamber. "The blood speaks truth," Amenemhat declared. "These children carry the divine essence of Pharaoh Kamet." Rahotep's face betrayed momentary dismay before recovering his mask of solemn acceptance. His carefully orchestrated delay tactics had failed. The temple's verdict was beyond challenge even for him. Outside, the news spread through Wesit like wildfire. The legitimacy that could no longer be questioned marked the first true victory for the reunited royal family, and the first significant defeat for those who sought to undermine them. The royal gardens at midnight were a different world. Lotus blooms glowing silver in moonlight, papyrus rustling in gentle breezes. Nayla walked alone along familiar paths she once knew intimately, her bare feet remembering every turn, despite 5 years' absence. At the sacred pool, where water mirrors reflected constellations, she found Kamet waiting. He'd abandoned royal regalia for a simple kilt, looking more like the young prince she'd married than the hardened ruler he'd become. "The blood ceremony changes everything," he said, breaking the silence between them. "No one can question their place now. Yet questions remain between us," Nayla replied softly. Kamet stepped closer, moonlight revealing new lines etched around his golden eyes. "I was wrong to send you away, wrong to trust Rahotep's counsel over what my heart knew. 5 years cannot be erased with words," she answered, though without the bitterness that once would have colored such a statement. "Not erased, no, but perhaps understood." His voice caught. "I mourned you every day. When I thought you barren, I mourned the family we'd never have. When you were gone, I mourned the love I'd sacrificed to pride." Nayla's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Our daughters paid the highest price for that pride. They grew 5 years without their father. Years I can never reclaim," he acknowledged, kneeling suddenly before her, a pharaoh on his knees. "I can only ask, help me know them now, and perhaps in time, find it in your heart to forgive." The night breeze stirred the lotus blossoms as Nayla gazed down at this man who had been everything to her. Husband, pharaoh, betrayer, father of her children. "For their sake," she whispered, "we begin again." The royal children's chamber glowed warm with oil lamps as Kamet entered, carrying a small wooden box adorned with lapis lazuli and gold. Finding the right moment for this had been difficult. Court duties and political maneuvering left little time for fatherhood. Zahra and Layla sat cross-legged on cushions, playing a board game with ivory pieces. They looked up with the wary curiosity they still held around him. "May I join you?" he asked, setting royal authority aside. After exchanging glances, they nodded. Kamet settled before them, placing the box between them. In our family, he explained, when royal children reach their 5th year, they receive their first true possession, something to mark their place in Egypt's heart. He opened the box, revealing 2 miniature golden ankhs, each set with carnelian and turquoise. The symbol of life, he said, because you have brought new life to this palace, and to me. They're beautiful, Zara whispered, touching hers reverently. I had them made when I learned of you, Kamet admitted. They should have been yours years ago. Something in his voice, the raw regret, reached Zara. She studied his face, so like her own in the mirror. Mother says you didn't know about us, she said carefully. No, but I should have looked harder for the truth. Kamet's voice wavered. I failed you both before you were born. He knelt before them, ceremonially lowering his head. My daughters, I cannot reclaim those years, but I swear by all gods to protect you with my life from this day forward. The sisters exchanged glances. Then Zara, always the bolder one, stepped forward and placed her small arms around his neck. Father, she whispered, testing the word that had existed only in stories until now. Great Mother Nefertari's private chambers occupied the palace's western wing, a position of honor befitting the woman who had given Egypt its ruler. Though advanced in years, she maintained a fierce dignity and a network of loyalties that made her a formidable presence in court politics. When the royal guard announced Queen Naila's request for audience, Nefertari's handmaidens exchanged nervous glances. For 5 years, mention of the exiled queen had been forbidden in these rooms. Send her in, Nefertari commanded, arranging herself regally on a cedar chair inlaid with ivory. Naila entered alone, dressed simply despite her restored status. The 2 women regarded each other silently, the aging queen mother who had once championed Rahotep's counsel and the younger queen who had suffered for it. You have brought quite the storm back to Waset, Nefertari finally observed. Not by choice, Naila replied evenly. I was content in my temple life until your son appeared, yet you kept his daughters from him. I protected them from those who had already proven dangerous. Nefertari's gaze sharpened. You mean me? Among others, Naila acknowledged. You stood silent when I was banished. The older woman's weathered hands tightened on her chair's armrests. I believed you barren. We all did. Did you question why? Or simply accept convenient truths? Something shifted in Nefertari's expression, a crack in her formidable facade. I have seen my granddaughter's eyes, golden, like my son's, like my husband's before him. She sighed deeply. I was wrong not to question, not to protect you. Rising slowly, Nefertari approached Naila and unexpectedly took her hands. You have shown remarkable strength. Egypt needs such strength now. Her grip tightened. But know this, regaining trust is harder than earning it the first time. Every eye watches, every ear listens. Are you prepared for that challenge? The assembly hall fell silent as Pharaoh Kamet ascended the judgment platform. Nobles, priests, and foreign envoys watched as Rahotep was led in, flanked by royal guards. For manipulation of royal council, intercepting messages meant for the divine throne, and conspiracy against the royal family, Kamet pronounced, you are stripped of titles and exiled to the Valley of Silence. The vizier's mask finally cracked as guards removed his chain of office. Egypt reclaims her justice today, Kamet declared, his golden eyes reflecting torchlight. Let all who serve remember, truth cannot remain buried forever. As Rahotep was led away, Naila and the princesses watched from the royal alcove, witnesses to the restoration of balance that would protect their future and heal Egypt's wounded heart. The coronation pavilion blazed with 1,000 oil lamps. Citizens from every quarter of Waset crowded the palace approach, their jubilant voices rising like the Nile at flood. Naila stood at the pavilion's center, wearing the double-plumed crown and vulture headdress of queenship. Beside her, Kamet raised the ceremonial scepter as the high priests of Amun and Isis chanted sacred texts. Egypt welcomes back its daughter, he proclaimed. The great royal wife Naila, mother of princesses Zara and Layla, rightful queen of the 2 lands. As cheers erupted, the twin princesses stepped forward in matching golden dresses. Priests placed delicate circlets upon their heads, their first official recognition as royal heirs. The royal family stood united before their people, a vision of restored harmony. For many in the crowd, it symbolized the gods' favor returning to Egypt after years of uncertainty. As musicians played and dancers whirled, Naila caught Maya's eye in the crowd. The old woman smiled, her mission accomplished. Justice and truth had finally prevailed over deception. Before the final ceremony, Kamet found Nayla in the palace library, surrounded by ancient scrolls. 5 years as a priestess had deepened her scholarly interests. "The court awaits us," he said softly, approaching where she sat, bathed in filtered sunlight. Nayla looked up from a papyrus detailing Hathor's sacred marriage. "Our story seems small compared to the gods," she mused. Kamet knelt beside her chair, yet no less meaningful. Taking her hand, he pressed something into her palm, a lotus bud carved from lapis. "I carried this through every campaign after you left," he confessed, a reminder of promises broken. And now, a promise renewed, to honor what we rebuild together, however different from what was lost. Nayla closed her fingers around the carved flower. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance, a foundation for their daughter's future and perhaps in time a new beginning for themselves. The Hall of Water Mirrors, where Kamet first saw Nayla dancing years ago, had been restored to its former glory. Shallow pools reflected torch flames and starlight from the open ceiling above, creating the illusion of dancing between two skies. The royal celebration reached its culmination here, with Egypt's elite gathered to witness the traditional first dance of the reunited royal couple. Musicians played softly as Kamet extended his hand to Nayla. As they moved together to the haunting melody, memories flowed between them: young love, bitter separation, and the unexpected journey back to each other. Their daughters watched wide-eyed from the dais, seeing their parents truly together for the first time. "We begin again," Kamet whispered, echoing her words from the garden. Nayla's response was a slight smile, not the carefree one of her youth, but one tempered by wisdom and survival. Together they danced between earth and sky, their shadows merging on the mirrored waters, a visual poem of separation and reunion that symbolized not just their personal journey, but Egypt's renewal under their reunited rule. The story of Kamet, Nayla, and their precious daughters will continue to live in your hearts. Isn't it remarkable how love can endure even through the harshest desert storms and the cruelest separations? This tale of redemption reminds us that sometimes life gives us second chances when we least expect them. Like Kamet, we've all made mistakes that seemed impossible to repair, yet with courage and truth, even the deepest wounds can begin to heal. What touched you most about this ancient Egyptian drama? Was it the moment Nayla stood strong against all odds to protect her daughters? Or perhaps when Kamet knelt before his children, humbling himself despite his godlike status? Maybe it was the final dance in the Hall of Water Mirrors, where two souls began to find their rhythm together once more. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know which character's journey resonated most deeply with your own life experiences. Have you ever had to forgive something that seemed unforgivable, or found yourself rediscovering a connection you thought was lost forever? If this story moved you to tears or made your heart swell with hope, please subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys through time and culture. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our weekly stories that remind us of the timeless nature of human emotions. And if you haven't already, be sure to watch our previous video about the legendary love between Cleopatra and Mark Antony, another tale of passion and politics that changed the course of history. Until our next adventure together, may you find the strength of Nayla, the humility of Kamet, and the golden-eyed wonder of Zara and Layla in your own life's journey.